link to it too, please?
Sure.
Thank you. Thanks. What I'm so curious about, and I'll ask the group this, is how to make a session like this, where it's really a content delivery session, how to make it more experiential in a very short period of time. Sarah, I know you always have good ideas about this. So I'll look forward to some responses on that. While we're waiting, could those of you on the call let me know if you're currently using experiential learning in your practice and using the Kolb Learning Style Inventory now?
So you can type responses to any of the questions tonight into the chat box, and we'll relay those responses back to Kay.
Otherwise, it feels kind of lonely here. Kind of a one-sided conversation. Oh, good. Keith mentioned the importance of full cycle agility. And I like that term, agility, Keith. We typically use the word flexibility, but I see agile is such a commonly used term now in software development and leadership agility. And I like the word very much. Great. And Stephanie, when you design simulations, do you use the learning cycle format?
Are we on?
Sure, go ahead, Sarah.
Hi. Have we already started? Did I miss something? Or do I need to do my introduction again? Because I think nobody could hear me.
Yeah, nobody could hear you, but we can hear you now.
Okay, sorry about that. Don't you love technology? And there's a learning curve. So Kay can tell us about how we can learn to use crazy technology faster, right, Kay? So this is Sarah Spengler. I am pleased to welcome you to this call. This is being sponsored by the WEBCAST Alumni Community Steering Group, of which I am one of the co-conveners. So I'm very excited that we are able to bring this to you. I've known Kay lightly for a few years. First met several years ago at an OD Connection event, I think. And I wanted to just give you one interesting tidbit about her besides the bio that was in the announcement for this program. So not surprisingly, Kay is a lifelong learner. She's a graduate of the MPOD program, MPOD 4, and is currently working on her PhD. So she's probably going to tell us about that work. But she's also a golfer. And I had asked her if she'd been golfing for a long time. She said yes, she had been golfing since she was a child. And she may have some interesting things to tell us about how she learned to play golf and how her learning style influenced that. So that might be an interesting question that we could ask her later. But it is a way that she both has fun and gets outdoors to enjoy nature, but also has been known to do business on the golf course. a time-honored tradition in our culture. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Kay, to get us off and running.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's really a pleasure to be with you. And I noticed on the list of attendees tonight, and I'm not sure who all is on yet, but I noticed there were 5 people from my MPOD cohort. So I especially wanted to say hi to Deirdre, Susan, Sydney, Argery, and Vicki, if they're on the call, and maybe not on the call, but maybe they'll see by video. I actually can still remember the first day of our MPOD program when we walked into David and Alice Kolb's class on experiential learning, something actually I'd never heard of before the MPOD program. And I remember our learning styles were put on the graphic that I'm sure you all have experienced too as MPOD graduates. And I can still see where those names were on the chart. So it's really, it's fun to be back talking about what all I've learned about experiential learning after working with this for a number of years now and loving it even more now. So I am really interested to know who all is using experiential learning and how you're using it, so I can make the most of our time together. So if you could just let me know. I have put together a loose agenda of talking a little bit about experiential learning and what it is. I think that it's really an important process to put on the agenda of any organizational change effort, and or anyone working in personal development to change. I also know that some of us are using the new Kolb Learning Styles Inventory, the KLSI 4.0, and others haven't been introduced to that yet. So I'd love to introduce you to the new 9 learning styles and the concept of learning flexibility that is actually a version of the old adaptive styles inventory, but it's now a part of the KLSI. And then I thought we could talk about some applications for experiential learning, what some of the new research is showing, and how it can support you in your practice. We also wanted to share some new resources that we have put together to support organization development practice and practice in experiential learning through the Institute for Experiential Learning, a new organization that we've started to provide experiential learning resources on education and tools for practice worldwide. And then I want to handle your questions. I really want to respond to your questions. So if there's any part of that agenda that it seems more important than others, I'm happy to spend more time focusing on that. If you could provide some feedback. I have to admit that it does feel strange talking about experiential learning in this kind of environment where it's not very interactive. I'll try to keep up with the chat box as I speak, but it doesn't feel very experiential at all. So one of the things I'm really interested in is your feedback on how, when we're doing content delivery like this, usually it's in smaller doses, but how we might make it more experiential. So I would love your feedback on that. But in the meantime, we'll be talking about a lot of concepts, but one of the things I'd encourage you to do is look at this from your own perspective and think about a learning challenge that you may be experiencing and frame today's discussion and the content in those terms. Well, coming from CASE, we all know the value of research, and I do want to just start this by saying that experiential learning is incredibly well researched. It has been for almost 50 years. And there are now over 4,000 articles in the bibliography, and it's growing exponentially every year. And so those of us who may have learned about experiential learning a decade ago or so, it's really been taking off in the literature. 27% of the most cited articles in management education journals are about experiential learning and learning styles. And there's work in every field. It's not just education, management, medicine, engineering, social work, innovation. All fields are using experiential learning. And so I think that we're all so lucky to have been introduced to it through David and Alice Kolb's work, and new things are happening. I often am met with some resistance when I use the term learning in organizations, and I wonder if you experience the same thing. There seems to be some feeling that learning is so automatic that everyone knows how to do it. It's so implicit that, especially I think to professionals that I work with, that they can diminish the importance before understanding that the way we learn is actually the way we approach problem solving and decision making and life in general. It's how we parent and partner and coach and consult. And so there are applications. I mean, it's just, there's such power in making learning explicit in our conversations. And because it's so automatic, I think we also have to focus on the fact that experiential learning does focus on our own experience. It's really not just having the experiences, but it's paying attention to our subjective, concrete experience as we have them. And so I think those are two really important things to keep in mind. So why do we need experiential learning? Well, I think 95% of what we do is automatic. And oftentimes we focus on our interests and we pay more and more attention to those interests. And we avoid other activities or experiences that are of little interest to us, or we feel like we don't have skills. And this is that process of accentuation that helps us to develop our learning style, a specialized style, really. But if we're only relying on our strengths that come naturally, we also can be limiting our effectiveness. We focus on these well-worn pathways of preferences, and they're reinforced, especially when we enter a field of specialization that allows us to choose situations that make use of our style. But the effectiveness of this approach is limited to the situations that require the strengths and capabilities of our style. For instance, if I prefer an analyzing style of learning, I'm going to love situations that call for working with data and analysis, but that may not be the best approach for me to face relationships or taking action. And so if we only use our preferences, we can actually become entrenched, and we miss out on other possibilities. And being entrenched is like riding a bike in this well-worn pathway and rut. We move forward, but we really don't have the ability to steer the bike. We're missing things all around us. And oftentimes I find, especially in coaching situations, that when we're faced with some need to change, we actually try to do what we know how to do, only we do it harder. And that isn't necessarily the most effective way. So I think we all can see a little part of ourselves in this picture. And especially in this era of specialization, when we are working in organizations that have many, many specialists. Garima Sharma and David Kolb did some great research on learning flexibility and entrenchment about 2010. And they found that people who preferred abstract learning styles, those associated with abstract thinking and abstract conceptualization, and work in STEM professions that require science and math competence, have more trouble moving from their learning style preference or their comfort zone. They actually seem to be entrenched in a problem-solving mentality, and they find it difficult to build feeling-oriented and active skills. So I think this is especially important for us in OD in this era of specialization. So when we're feeling stuck, one of the most important things we can do for ourselves or our clients is to build self-awareness. And there is no better way that I have found than an understanding of our own learning style preferences. You know, Carl Rogers is one of the foundational scholars on which David Kolb built experiential learning or created experiential learning. And he was well known for advocating that the way in which we change is really by first accepting ourselves very deeply, just the way we are. And I think learning styles helps us to know ourselves in a very unique way, because we can continue to witness ourselves in process. So one of the big advances in experiential learning is this concept of learning flexibility or learning agility. And learning flexibility is really the antidote to being stuck or being in this very specialized way. If you can imagine riding that bike on a wide open road, we can actually learn to use learning styles that are less familiar. Now, who wouldn't want to develop this part of themselves, those dancing shadows, the part that we may not have found or discovered yet? And you can use learning styles as this map for self-development. And in fact, it is the normal course for our development, as long as we continue to meet challenges, learning challenges as we face them. You may remember that in experiential learning, there's also a theory of development. Actually, over the course of time, we can use this same process to build skills, to learn new things, but also to continue to develop throughout the course of our lives. We begin with that stage of early acquisition phase, and then we enter a period of specialization in which we have this specialized learning style. And it actually can make us very successful. But ultimately, like this picture shows, while it provides strength and allows us to find a path in life, if we overuse those strengths, they actually can become weaknesses at some point. But if we continue to respond to challenges in life and learning, at midlife and beyond, we actually can move into this phase of integration, where we can discover these parts of ourselves that we may have disregarded or have just not discovered yet. But as this picture implies, we actually can find those parts of ourselves. And if the picture isn't enough inspiration for you, there is great research to show why learning flexibility or learning agility is so very important. It's been linked to greater flexibility in life in general. As we said, when we're very inflexible, we actually don't see possibilities for situations. And when we're flexible, we see more possibilities in any moment. we actually experience less conflict and stress, even though we have more complex relationships when we're flexible. It's also been linked to the ability to manage more complexity. And that's, I believe, possibly related to the fact that we actually understand how to manage dilemmas in our lives, because we're doing that in the learning cycle when we're using all of these styles. We're also more self-directed, and learning flexibility has been linked to later stages of adult development. And last but not least, there's also evidence to indicate we're happier when we're more flexible. Any questions so far? So let's take a look at what happens beneath the surface that keeps us in that steady state of learning. I'm sure this learning cycle looks familiar to everybody. This 4-step cycle that is actually simple enough for clients to learn in a very short period of time, of experiencing, reflecting, thinking, and acting. And I have overlaid there on the cycle the old 4 learning styles that you may have been introduced to originally. But of course, you may remember that the 4 steps in the cycle are actually pairs of opposites. Experiencing and thinking are 2 ways we know the world. Experiencing by our feelings and emotions, our direct concrete experience in 5 senses. Thinking is really knowledge about the world. This is where we're detached. We use facts and ideas and concepts, mental models to know the world. And then reflecting and acting are 2 ways that we transform or process information. In reflecting, of course, we're making sense and mulling over. It's an internal process. In acting, we're testing options and by doing. So this is actually, in life, it's a more dynamic cycle and maybe a little messier than this idealized version. But the important thing is that we do use all 4 steps of the cycle. And it's very iterative. It's really more like a spiral of learning. So as you look at this cycle, can you think back on your learning experience, on the learning challenge that you're considering, and check to see if you're using all steps in this process? You know, it's really a very holistic process because it takes into account our feelings, our perceptions, our thoughts, and our actions. And as I said, it can be used in any learning situation. Oftentimes when I'm coaching or training, I'll even overlay whatever it is we're talking about onto the learning cycle. And people can usually see in just a short period of time the steps that they're using and those that they might be avoiding. I'm looking at one of the questions, and Sarah's asked, do we need to complete the entire learning cycle, even if we start from one process or prefer to start? I think people do, depending on where we enter this cycle and where we prefer to dwell. That really is what defines our learning style. And the important thing is that certainly over time and with knowledge of this process, it's important to use all 4 steps of the process. And really now what we talk about in full cycle learning, David and Alice Kolb have expanded these 4 modes of learning to the new 9 styles. And I think it's really adds richness, and it's worth learning these new 9 styles. I do understand from people who have used the 4 styles in the past. I mean, we all go through a learning curve to use the 9 styles. But you can see that it really, the 9 styles include the original 4 modes of learning: experiencing, reflecting, thinking, and acting, and also the spaces in between, which are combination styles. And then there's a new style, balancing, in the middle. And I'll be happy to go through the styles if that's of interest to people. But one of the ways that I find that I always go back to translate these styles is that I always go back to tie them back to the learning cycle. For instance, the experiencing style, the way one navigates the cycle in that, using that style, is to take in or grasp through experiencing or feeling, and then process or transform either through reflecting or acting. Whereas the imagining style, in that style, we take in through experiencing and we process through reflecting. And so that's a combination style. And in imagining, we would spend the least amount of time in deciding. Those polar opposites are important. And likewise, with experiencing, we would spend the least amount of time in thinking. And so it's really a more granular look at what the 4 styles entailed. And there's more detail that can provide a richness in terms of any process as well. So I always like to tie the steps back, the styles back to steps in the process. So just looking at this from the whole, kind of zooming out to give you some context, the northernmost 3 styles of initiating, experiencing, and imagining are really focused on relationships. The eastern styles of imagining, reflecting, analyzing focus on information, whereas the southern 3, deciding, thinking, and analyzing, focus on analysis and, again, abstract conceptualization in the original cycle. And the western, initiating, acting, and deciding, are really focused on results and outcomes. And so I like to kind of keep that in mind as I think about them. And the other thing that helps me is this is such a holistic model that these are 9 styles. There are 9 steps in any process. There are 9 team roles. And there are 9 parts of all of us as whole people. And so when we develop capabilities in all of these styles, we really are developing all parts of ourselves. I also want to make sure that we all are grounded in the knowledge that learning styles are really dynamic ways of navigating this cycle. It's where we enter and where we prefer to dwell in the learning cycle. They're habits of learning, and they provide ways of appreciating our strengths and challenges, and also those of others who are different than we are. What learning styles aren't are traits or pigeonholes or stereotypes. And so I think that gives a great advantage to the Kolb Learning Styles Inventory as an assessment to use with our clients, because these are not trait-based styles. These are styles we can all develop a range of using any of these styles, even if they're unfamiliar to us when we start. So as you look at this and think about your own learning challenge, can you notice what parts of the cycle, again, that you're using? And I'm assuming that you would like me to walk through the 9 styles. Is that correct? And just review what those are and how we can identify them. And you may want to think back about what your style was when you took it in the 4 style version of the KLSI. And I try to identify what style might seem to be most in your comfort zone at this point. So I haven't seen any response, but I'm assuming from talking to Kylie and Pat as the program started that you would like me to review the 9 styles. So let's start with experiencing, because it all begins with experiencing. In experiencing, again, we're taking in through feelings and experiencing, transforming through reflecting and acting, and spending the least amount of time in thinking. It's here that we find meaning from deep involvement in experiencing. This is our connector. We show up here as engaging and warm and mindful, comfortable with emotions. We build trusting relationships, and we're involved and engaged in the environment, and we connect personally when communicating. In imagining style, this is our dreamer. And here we're, again, taking in through experiencing, transforming through reflecting, spending the least amount of time in deciding. Here we imagine possibilities by observing and reflecting. We're caring and creative and empathetic when using this style. We love generating new ideas. We seek others' opinions. We love more information and imagining new possibilities. Then in reflecting, this is our sense maker. In reflecting, we connect experiences and ideas through reflection. We are patient and observant. We're listen with an open mind. We love to gather new perspectives, take a variety of perspectives, and identify underlying issues. Then in analyzing is our planner. Here we integrate ideas into concise modules. This is what we're doing now, is really analyzing, looking at models and theories. Here we show up as being organized and methodical, attention to detail, and we're precise. In analyzing, we love to plan ahead to minimize mistakes and organize to get the full picture. And then in thinking, again, we're taking in here through ideas and concepts, facts. We're as far away from our feelings as we can get in thinking style. And this is our questioner, actually even our healthy skeptic. Here we're disciplined, and we like abstract reasoning. We love logic and framing in arguments with logic. We make our independent judgments here and use critical thinking. Again, we're not using our feelings, but we're using facts. Then in deciding style, again, as far away from imagining as we can get, we are taking in through thinking, abstract thinking, and processing or transforming through acting. This is our internal judge. Here we are direct, realistic. We love practical results. We love to find solutions to problems. Here's where we commit to one solution. This is the old converging style. We know how to take a stand and commit to one goal here in deciding style. In acting style, this is our achiever. And in acting style, again, we pay the least attention to reflecting, and we take in through experiencing and thinking. But this is where we love to implement and reach the finish line. We integrate people and tasks and show up on time assertively, and we get it done. This is where we meet time deadlines and make things happen. I often see when people are in the acting style, they'll tap their watch. They like to get things done on time and achieve results with limited resources. In initiating style, this is our influencer. This is where we really seize opportunities. We show up as being outgoing and spontaneous. We think on our feet. This is our where we can bounce back from setbacks, and we influence and mobilize others. Then in balancing style, which is a new style to the 9 styles, this is really our middle ground. I like to think of this one as being our internal adapter. We are resourceful here. It's kind of we're a jack of all trades, and we can fill in the gaps. We bridge differences and adapt to shifting priorities. It's our place of being able to compromise. So you can see where these 9 styles require different strengths and capabilities. They all have upsides and downsides. And you can see if we overuse a style, we can experience the downside of that style. Any questions about the new learning styles? I'd be very curious to those of you who use the 9 styles. One of the questions we always get is how to make this shift from the 4 styles to the 9 styles, and I'd love to know how you're doing it. Were you able to track your previous learning style in these new learning styles? I think the new names for the styles make them very accessible. Well, I wanted to show you the new Cold Learning Style Inventory 4.0, the KLSI 4.0, just so that you could see the graphics on the report. But there's an important page that I wanted you to see, and that is the Learning Flexibility page. And this is page 17 in the new report. But it's such a rich feedback report. And one of the major, I think, improvements is this idea of learning flexibility. The fact that we all have a preferred learning style, and in this case, as you can see on the graphic on the right side of this slide, this subject's preferred learning style is analyzing. But we also have backup styles that we use regularly to face different situations. And if any of you have taken the new learning styles inventory, there are 10 questions that place you in different learning situations, meeting someone new, analyzing a problem, working in groups. And so as you respond to those, you identify other learning styles that you use as backups. And these are amazingly accurate in any coaching situation I've had. And it really provides a map of what part of the learning cycle we use and what part we might avoid or underutilize. You'll also notice on the left side of this slide is a learning flexibility score. And although I consider the graphic much more important as a coaching tool, there is also a learning flexibility score that has more meaning really for research than reporting. However, a medium score would be about a 0.5, and anything over 0.7, anything over 0.7 is considered a fairly high learning flexibility. But I really think the value of this is in using the entire cycle in all the styles. In last spring, David Kolb and I wrote a book entitled How You Learn is How You Live. And following that, we also created a personal development guide or a workbook that we intended to be a coaching tool or a guide for individual discovery, but to help us make sense of our learning style and to apply practices for building flexibility as well. And so you might be interested in looking at some of the exercises in that guidebook as you coach. By the way, how many of you do coach as well as consult? Or are you in-house as well as working as consultants? I'd love to know in the chat box. Oh, good. Okay. Inside and outside coaching. Okay, good. Well, I said I would bring up different resources, new resources that are available. And the one that I think is a critical addition to everyone's library is The Experiential Educator. Alice and David Kolb published this book just in the last few months, so it's hot off the press. It is an incredible resource for everything about experiential learning, and it includes so much of their experience, their firsthand experience in applying these ideas. So it not only explains everything about experiential learning, but it also includes their rich experience in applying all these concepts. And a couple of the things that I think are of particular note in this book are a focus on creating learning spaces and how that is such a critical part of learning, creating learning circumstances. There's also a great section on deliberate learning for life, applying experiential learning in our own lives to continue our development. So I can't recommend this book highly enough. It's really just an incredible resource, and one that you'll read slowly as you have a need to. But there are some gems in this book that I thought I would share with you, and one has to do with teams. I know that there was interest on about applying this at the team level, and David and Alice Kolb describe research by Claudia Jules, who did his PhD at Case, and he discusses deep diversity. He examined the influence of demographic diversity and also learning style diversity with teams, and actually used the experiential learning cycle for a team process using those 4 modes of learning. And he found that learning style diversity and using these experiential learning norms or using the learning cycle process created less process conflict, and they were positively related to decision making and performance on teams. So learning style diversity was positively related to the performance, especially when there were routine tasks, and experiential learning team norms, or using the process of learning on the team, was related to performance with non-routine tasks. Whereas using just demographic diversity alone, which was age and gender and race, produced moderate levels of process conflict and actually impeded team performance. So I think this raises a great question about whether we can use learning styles as a way to reframe diversity. And then also I wanted to share some new research by Chris Case, who's the co-author of the Kolb Team Learning Experience. I believe Chris Case, his wife Anna Case, David and Alice Kolb created this team learning experience. And Chris has continued to research teams. In a study that he did in 2016 with a colleague, Yoon found that he studied grocery store teams. He found that team learning accounted for as much as 20% of the financial performance of teams. He found that making learning explicit on these teams, using learning style preferences to impact the process, to understand how the process was impacted, which this slide actually shows, because we can see where if we over focus on certain parts of the cycle by having preferences in those styles, we can either linger too long or skip the parts of the process entirely. For instance, if we focus on the northeast quadrant of experiencing, imagining, reflecting, we actually build relationships and think of new ideas, gather new information. But if we only stay there, we will have no results. If we skip reflecting, analyzing, and thinking, we'll have information and structure to our team, but we'll be in paralysis. Likewise, if we focus on thinking, deciding, and acting, we'll set our goals and measure progress. But if we only do that, we'll just experience the same thing over and over again with no improvements. And if we skip acting, initiating, and experiencing, we will not reach the finish line. But if we over focus on those, we may be aiming toward the wrong goal. So this gives you an idea of how this can be used in the team process. And this is a place where I see great opportunities for us in organization development to create circumstances for learning, where we're working with people who understand what the learning process is. We make learning explicit, and then we individually and collectively try to build our flexibility. So just imagine that you're on a team where you have great relationships, where there's psychological safety and good relationships. The team understands this learning process. We all know and appreciate our style differences. This really gives us an opportunity to build flexibility and take advantage of the effectiveness of team learning. Because if you think about, if 80% of our behaviors are shaped by the environment, we can use these relationships and context to become a positive force or a positive ground on which we operate. And then if 95% of our behavior is automatic without our consciousness, teams can support our mindful experiencing and shed light on our blind spots. And when we apply learning in this way, we know that it's really a long-term process. We have to be able to approach it slowly and deliberately and not be depleted. And I think teams can help us realize that. So we will really, I think this is a way we can all benefit and something we can have a big influence on. You know, I'm noticing our time. We're actually running out of time, and I want to leave some time for questions. Does anyone have a question that you would like for me to address at this point? Well, while we're waiting, rather than lose any of these precious minutes, let me just share a little research that I've done. We actually did a study of about 400 attorneys. There's about 400 attorneys in this sample set. And although this is learning in organizations, it was done across organizations, but each individual firm is actually about the same composition. And I just wanted to show you what we discovered about this, how learning styles can impact an organizational culture. You know, we talked about the fact that when we are grounded in abstract thinking, that we can become a little entrenched and actually see problems everywhere. And if you think about attorneys, that's exactly what they do. And about 60% of this sample um, actually have learning styles with a preference in abstract thinking, the deciding, thinking, and analyzing styles. And only 16% have styles that prefer concrete experiencing, or these northern styles where we form relationships and use our feelings, um, look for new possibilities and seize new opportunities. And so I think it's interesting to imagine how this can impact an organizational culture. And one of the reasons that we are called in to work with attorneys is because they're facing challenges of assuming new roles in leadership. And so the skills and practices that they've used to become subject matter experts, both in abstract thinking and reflecting and just making decisions, may serve them very well in the practice of law, but not so well in the business of law. And so um, that expertise also has to become, they have to build skills in leading other people and developing business relationships, developing business in general, and moving from just solving problems to looking for new opportunities and innovating. Also, from working alone to working collaboratively with others. And so, this, I think, is a great map for how flexibility can be used within an organization in coaching situations, individual coaching, in working with teams, and also with organizations. I'm just going to keep going on until, oh, how does one determine? I'm sorry, I'm having trouble getting my chat box where I can see the whole question. Kylie, could you read that to me, please?
Sure. This question from Earl is, how does one determine between the results of an organization's learning style where they currently are versus the ideal where learning can be optimized?
Well, I think that, first of all, I think the ideal is that we are all very flexible, or that we complement each other's capabilities. And so if you look at styles as favoring certain parts of the learning process, I think most organizations benefit from having capabilities in all the different styles, and we individually do. And part of I think part of the challenge is also, as this one says, coaching around the cycle. But I want to make sure that everyone knows about this resource as well. Earl, and maybe this will be helpful. But it looks like from early research that the way we learn is also the way we teach, the way we coach, the way we train, the way we manage and lead. And the Kolb Educator Role Profile is actually a way of looking at how you're favoring different roles that are required in any educating situation, and that involves most situations in organizations, and how to match your roles to the situation. So there may be times when being a subject expert is not as important as being a coach or a facilitator. And so I would encourage everybody to take this profile. I also wanted to make you aware of a few things that we're doing through the Institute that I hope will be of interest to you in your practice. We have developed a new learning style, Flexibility 360, a way of assessing whether our intent to develop flexibility is actually has an impact on other people as well. Other people can report to us that we are building flexibility. Um, and this is ties together. I think one of the things we've tried to do is tie together the styles, skills that are associated with the expression of that style, the team role that is associated with that style as well, and also the preferred, what we prefer, the preferred steps in the process that are associated with the style. So we can compare our self-rating to the ratings of others and take a more granular look at rater groups by learning style and by individual skills. So if anyone is interested in taking this or using it in your practice, please get in touch with me and let us know, because it's brand new. We just have put it online, and we're anxious to share it. The other thing is that we have a new program, online program, that will be available in the first quarter of next year. How you learn is how you lead. We're looking at the intersection between learning flexibility and leadership development. And this will be a asynchronous and synchronous program. So there will be, it's a 3-to-1 ratio of self-paced online learning. And then we're going to have an interactive discussion group session as well for the 2 modules involved in this. And we're doing it as an affiliate program so that we can partner with OD professionals and leaders in talent development to share learning styles with organizations who may not have been exposed to it. So we will are looking to partner with people to do this. So if you have a group who might be interested, please get in touch with us. It's really a very exciting program. The other thing is that we started a certification program online. We just finished our first one. David and Alice Cole, Chris Kays, and I are facilitating the 8 sessions, 8 weeks of sessions. It's actually a flipped classroom, so most of the content is on a learning platform that can be accessed at any time, and the only time that we're together are for these 8 weeks of an hour and a half each of interactive discussion groups. And it's been a really fun learning process doing this, and we're launching our next cohort in January. So if you're at all interested or know someone who might be, please let me know. We also have a very active community of practice. We meet 3 times a year virtually, and we get together in person every summer in June. This year, we're back in Cleveland. It's June 21st and 22nd. We're just accepting, we're actually just accepting proposals for presentations at this conference. So if you have an idea for a proposal or know someone who might, please let them know immediately, because it'll just be a few more days that we have this open. But our annual conference is really a great event. David and Alice Kolb always provide a research update and share all the latest thinking in experiential learning, and they are so generous in supporting this community. We have a great group of people who are all interested in learning and supporting each other, and so I do hope you'll all consider coming and joining us. Anyway, this has been anything but experiential for you, and it's actually the antithesis of experiential learning. So I'll look forward to your questions and ideas about what you've learned and how we can all actually, in situations like this, in online learning situations, try to make these kinds of sessions more experiential. were you at least able to think about your learning situation and get some ideas about how you might go through the cycle? Well, please contact me with any questions you might have, and let us know how we can support you to use experiential learning in your practice.
Thank you very much, Kay. And everyone, if you want to thank Kay, you can just type into the chat box before you leave, and she'll see all of those messages. And do reach out with any further questions that you have. And yes, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much for having me. I'll look forward to hearing from everybody.
Good night.
Good night. Thanks, Kylie.
Thanks, Kay. That was awesome. You're doing some great work.
Kylie, if you'll stop the recording, I just have a question for you.
Oh, yeah, good idea.
Okay.